Good evening. As we mark another month of this brutal conflict, the skies over Ukraine have become the primary stage for Russia's escalating aggression. In recent days, we have witnessed some of the most intense aerial bombardments since the war began over 3 years ago. On July 9th alone, Russia launched an unprecedented barrage of 741 missiles and drones, a staggering number aimed at overwhelming Ukraine's defenses. President Zelensky reported that in just 1 week, Russia unleashed over 1,800 drones and more than 1,200 guided aerial bombs against Ukrainian towns and cities. This relentless assault from the air is Moscow's clear strategy to terrorize civilians and cripple the nation's infrastructure, turning every night into a new test of survival for millions. This aerial campaign is a grim backdrop to the reality on the ground, where the front lines have largely settled into a bloody stalemate. While Russia continues to make incremental gains, they are slow and incredibly costly. In the past month, Russian forces have managed to capture approximately 190 square miles of territory, a fraction of their ambitious goals. Their most recent advances have been even smaller, gaining just 18 square miles last week. Moscow's primary focus remains the Donetsk region, where its defense ministry claims the capture of small villages like Mykolivka and Mir. Despite these claims, military analysts express serious doubts that Russia can achieve its objective of seizing the entire region by the end of 2025. The overall picture of territorial control has changed very little in recent months, highlighting the grinding nature of this war of attrition. As of today, July 13th, 2025, Russia occupies roughly 19% of Ukraine's sovereign territory. This figure includes Crimea and parts of the Donbas that were seized long before the full-scale invasion in 2022. The total area under Russian control amounts to a massive 44,481 square miles, a constant and painful reminder of the immense challenge Ukraine faces in liberating its land. The fierce Ukrainian resistance has effectively prevented any major Russian breakthroughs, locking both armies into a deadly inch-by-inch fight across a vast and scarred landscape. In a surprising and defiant countermove, Ukrainian forces continue to hold a small but symbolically important piece of Russian territory. For months, they have maintained a foothold of about 5 square miles inside Russia's Kursk and Belgorod regions. This small patch of land serves as a constant irritant to the Kremlin and a demonstration of Ukraine's resolve to take the fight to the aggressor. While the front line in Ukraine itself remains a brutal and slow-moving meat grinder, these cross-border positions show that Kyiv is not merely defending. It is actively seeking ways to disrupt Russian logistics and morale, proving that this war is being fought on both sides of the border. The human toll of this war is almost impossible to comprehend, with casualty figures rising to devastating levels. For Russia, the losses have been catastrophic. Conservative estimates now place the number of Russian soldiers killed or injured at over 790,000, while some Western intelligence sources suggest the total could be over 1 million. This includes up to 250,000 troops killed in action. On the Ukrainian side, the price of defending their homeland is also heartbreakingly high. Estimates suggest that at least 400,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed or wounded. These numbers represent shattered families, lost generations, and a profound national trauma that will echo for decades to come, long after the fighting stops. Beyond the battlefield, the war has inflicted immense suffering on civilians and triggered a massive displacement crisis. In Ukraine, the United Nations has confirmed the deaths of over 13,000 civilians, though the true number is likely far higher. The constant threat of shelling and airstrikes has forced 9.4 million Ukrainians, more than 1/5 of the pre-war population, to flee their homes. Of these, 5.6 million are now refugees scattered across the globe. This war is not just about territory, it is about the deliberate dismantling of a society. It is about empty cities, schools turned to rubble, and the millions of quiet personal tragedies that unfold every single day. In the face of this onslaught, Ukraine's survival remains deeply dependent on the support of its international partners. After a period of uncertainty, a significant development came from the United States. Former President Donald Trump, who had previously been critical of the aid, announced that the US would resume weapons shipments to Ukraine through NATO channels. This policy shift is a major boost for Kyiv, and NATO's new chief, Mark Rutte, is scheduled to meet with Mr. Trump in Washington to solidify this renewed commitment. For Ukraine, this lifeline of weapons, ammunition and financial aid is absolutely essential to continue its defense against a much larger aggressor. This renewed support from Washington is bolstered by a strengthening resolve across Europe. A coalition of 8 Balkan and Eastern European nations, including Croatia, Romania and Moldova, recently signed a declaration in Dubrovnik, affirming their strong support for Ukraine's eventual membership in NATO. They argue that bringing Ukraine into the alliance is the most cost-effective security option for the entire continent. President Zelensky has relentlessly echoed this call for security, pleading for more advanced air defense systems to protect his people. He has made it clear that Ukraine is fighting not just for its own freedom, but for the security of Europe, stating, "This war can only be stopped through strength." A deeply concerning development in this conflict is the deepening military alliance between Russia and North Korea. Facing its own shortages of ammunition after years of high-intensity warfare, Moscow has found a willing supplier in Pyongyang. South Korean intelligence reports that North Korea has already shipped over 12 million artillery shells to Russia, a massive infusion of firepower that directly fuels the Kremlin's war machine. This partnership goes beyond just munitions. Kim Jong-un has pledged his unconditional support for Russia, and disturbingly, North Korean soldiers are now appearing on the battlefield. Around 10,000 troops have already been deployed, with Ukrainian intelligence warning that number could soon rise to 30,000. The presence of North Korean troops and munitions on Ukrainian soil represents a significant escalation and a new dangerous phase of the war. It demonstrates the lengths to which Vladimir Putin is willing to go to sustain his invasion, turning to one of the world's most isolated and repressive regimes for help. For Ukraine, it means facing an enemy that is now being resupplied and reinforced by a foreign power. This alliance, cemented by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's recent visit to Pyongyang, where he hailed an invincible fighting brotherhood, complicates the battlefield and raises the stakes for Ukraine and its Western partners, who must now factor this new axis into their strategic calculations. In response to Russia's overwhelming numerical and material advantage, Ukraine has been forced to innovate and fight an asymmetric war. It has masterfully harnessed drone technology to counter Russian advances. Improved Ukrainian drone tactics have become crucial in stalling assaults, destroying armored vehicles, and striking targets deep behind enemy lines. Kyiv has vowed to continue these active drone operations on Russian territory, seeing them as a just and necessary response to the relentless attacks on its own cities. These strikes, including those that have reportedly disabled 1/6 of Russia's fuel production facilities, are a key part of Ukraine's strategy to impose direct costs on Russia for its aggression. Beyond the front lines, Ukraine is waging a shadow war against key Russian figures and assets. The SBU, Ukraine's security service, has claimed responsibility for a series of covert operations, including the recent killing of 2 Russian FSB agents in Kyiv, who were accused of assassinating a high-ranking SBU colonel. This follows earlier operations believed to be behind the assassinations of Russian generals. At the same time, Ukraine is struggling to replenish its own ranks. To address critical manpower shortages, the government has lowered the conscription age to 25. However, this necessary measure has faced challenges, highlighting the immense strain the war is placing on the entire Ukrainian population. For ordinary Ukrainians, daily life is a struggle for survival defined by uncertainty and loss. The war has shattered the country's economy, which has shrunk by nearly 23% since the invasion began. The most immediate crisis is energy. Russian attacks have systematically targeted power plants, destroying or occupying nearly 2/3 of Ukraine's electricity generating capacity. For families and businesses, this means enduring rolling blackouts, unpredictable heating, and the constant fear of a complete grid collapse as winter approaches. This is a deliberate strategy by Moscow to make life inside Ukraine unbearable, hoping to break the will of a people who have already endured so much. The psychological toll is immense, but the threat is also physical, even far from the front lines. Nowhere is this more apparent than at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which remains under Russian occupation. The International Atomic Energy Agency has repeatedly sounded the alarm, recently reporting hundreds of rounds of small arms fire and drone strikes near the facility. The military activity in and around Europe's largest nuclear plant is, as the IAEA director stated, unacceptable. A single miscalculation or stray shell could trigger a radiological disaster with consequences that would dwarf the current conflict and affect the entire continent for generations. This constant nuclear threat hangs over everyone. Amidst the fighting, the path to peace appears more distant than ever. While polls show that majorities in both Russia, 64%, and Ukraine, 51%, support the idea of peace talks, their leaders remain locked in irreconcilable positions. Vladimir Putin, reportedly believing that time is on his side and that Russia's battlefield position is improving, shows no genuine interest in negotiating. He is unwilling to consider any settlement that does not involve Ukraine ceding the territory Russia has illegally annexed. For Ukraine, any peace that involves surrendering its land and its people to the occupier is seen as an existential defeat, not a resolution. This diplomatic stalemate leaves the world in a perilous position. Leaders continue to speak of ending the war, but their words often feel disconnected from the grim reality on the ground. President Zelensky is reportedly considering appointing his defense minister as the next ambassador to the US, a move aimed at strengthening ties and securing the aid needed to keep fighting. The message from Kyiv is clear: peace cannot come at the cost of freedom. This update from July 2025 is a stark reminder that this is not a distant regional conflict. It is a war whose outcome will define international security, test global alliances, and shape the world we all live in for the foreseeable future.